November 7th, 1885, the day that would reshape the history of the Balkan Peninsula for decades to come. Even before dawn, the weather softens, the sky clears, and the stars begin to mirror in the puddles of melting snow. In just a few hours, near Sливница, the warm autumn sun will bear witness to the bloodiest day of the war, a day when two 30,000-strong armies will clash with monstrous fury. While across southern Bulgaria, tens of thousands of men march tirelessly toward the front, north of the Balkan Mountains, the ancient Bulgarian fortress of Vidin prepares for a long siege. The High Command in Sofia makes a flawless choice, appointing one of the most capable Bulgarian captains as commander of the northern detachment, Atanas Uzunov, the very first Bulgarian officer to graduate from the Military Engineering Academy in St. Petersburg. In just a few weeks, this erudite military engineer manages to transform Vidin into an impenetrable stronghold. Both south of the Balkans and in the northern theatre, the initial deployment of troops aims to secure the border, preventing the Serbians from occupying the Vidin region without firing a single shot. The 150-kilometer border, stretching from Kom Peak to Bregovo, is divided into 4 sectors where reserve companies, militia units, and volunteer detachments occupy and fortify every single road leading from Serbia into Bulgaria. On October 18th, 2 weeks before the outbreak of the war, when the border is already secured against a peaceful occupation by the Serbian forces and the Vidin fortress is reasonably garrisoned, the 29-year-old Minister of War, Captain Nikiforov, orders the formation of the so-called Flying Detachment in Lom, designated for active operations, primarily on Serbian territory. Once again, by his command, the artillery arsenal in Russe is emptied. Day and night, the ships of the Danube Flotilla cut through the river's waves against the current, overloaded to the brink with tons of gunpowder, hundreds of thousands of ammunition rounds, and heavy fortress artillery. The Danube Flotilla is destined to play a decisive role in holding Vidin. At the onset of the war, the northern detachment consisted of 11 battalions, 1 cavalry squadron, and 6 artillery batteries, totaling 15,000 men, 164 sabres, and 37 cannons, yet without a single regular soldier in its ranks. Facing these Bulgarian units, composed entirely of reservists, militiamen, and volunteers, stands General Lesyanin at the helm of the 20,000-strong Timok army. According to the battle plan of Colonel Dragashevich, the primary objective is to mortify Vidin, either as a launching pad for an invasion into Serbia by troops Bulgaria might gather along the Danube, or as a shield for the Lom-Sofia road, through which the Bulgarians could reinforce their positions in the Sofia region from the Danube banks. Consequently, the Serbian forces in the northern theatre are tasked with reaching the Danube behind Vidin, cutting off the transport of troops along the river towards either Vidin or Sofia. Following this, the detachment is ordered to capture Vidin and expand its reach towards Berkovica, intensifying the direct threat to Sofia. Since the Serbians took no action in the northern theatre on November 2nd, while launching a full-scale offensive in the south, the headquarters of the northern detachment, the Bulgarian Army headquarters, and the Ministry of War all concluded that the enemy forces on the northern front were weak and would remain on the defensive. The idea of launching a surprise counter-offensive instantly gripped everyone. Early on November 2nd, Captain Uzunov telegraphed the army headquarters in Plovdiv with a copy to the Minister of War.
Моля убедително, разрешете ми най-скоро да навляза в Сърбия.
Chances of success are extremely high. To which the Chief of Staff, РачоПетров, replied, "His Highness commands you to advance energetically with all the forces you can muster." Meanwhile, on November 3rd, the Serbian army crossed the border on the left strategic flank of the defense, advancing towards Belogradchik and Kula, the latter falling after a 2-hour battle. Captain Uzunov reacted with lightning speed, dispatching Captain Todorov's flying detachment towards Kula, with orders to execute a surprise strike on the Serbians advancing and liberate the town. At the exact same time, preparations for a Bulgarian offensive on the right strategic flank at Bregovo were underway at full speed. And so, on November 4th, at precisely 8 a.m., Lieutenant Rakovski's artillery opened a hurricane of fire upon the Serbian trenches across the Timok River from a distance of 800 meters. Under the cover of exploding shrapnel shells, Sub-Lieutenant Todorov and his pioneer company performed a true logistical miracle, constructing a bridge over the swollen river in just one single hour. The Vidin Reserve Company crossed the Timok at a dead run, stormed the enemy positions and forced the Serbians to throw down their weapons. At 9:30 a.m., to the rhythmic thunder of war drums, Lieutenant Draganov's detachment crossed the Vidin Bridge. The Bulgarians advanced decisively, shattering the enemy's front lines and sweeping away the Serbian reserve at the wine cellars of Bukovca village, capturing an entire wagon full of abandoned enemy rifles. As a dense fog rolled in, the companies deployed into formation, holding off the fierce counterattacks of 4 Serbian battalions from the 9th Regiment with superhuman willpower. The Bulgarian triumph was complete. And slightly further south, Lieutenant Petrov, brother of РачоПетров, surprised and routed a Serbian company in the village of Temnich. But at midnight, the silence was shattered by catastrophic news. Lieutenant Draganov received an order to immediately retreat back across the Timok. The flying detachment had been crushed at Kula, and Vidin was now under direct threat of an enemy assault. A day earlier, Captain Todorov's flying detachment received a fateful telegram from Captain Uzunov.
Да се приготвят за тръгване!
Depart for Kula immediately and in total secrecy. The Serbians are heavily advancing towards Sofia. Hurry! At the helm of the mixed Alexandrovska Reserve Battalion, a gendarmerie cavalry squadron, and 6 artillery pieces, totaling around 1,000 soldiers, Captain Todorov set out. Before reaching Kula, he was joined by the main reserve unit, composed primarily of national militia detachments, adding about 2,500 men to his ranks. This heterogeneous, improvised military force, consisting mostly of untrained peasants and virtually devoid of officers, hurled itself against the regular Timok division, precisely as the Serbians were preparing to march from Kula towards Vidin. The first Bulgarian shell struck the cavalry, scattering it in panic. A second landed directly amidst the reserve of the forward pickets, and a third crashed into the Serbian supply train. The moment was staggering, wrote an officer of the Timok army. The surprise achieved its goal. The impression produced by this enemy appearance can hardly be described. Whomever you looked at, their face was turned yellow-green with terror. Seizing the advantage of surprise, Captain Tudorov captured one of the fortifications, while the commander of the main reserve, Captain Guncho Georgiev, managed to cut off the enemy's line of retreat towards Vershka Chuka. However, his detachment, consisting mostly of untrained and poorly armed militiamen, buckled and retreated under a heavy artillery barrage. Georgiev himself was encircled and captured, along with 100 of his soldiers, after the volunteers left in reserve were shelled by artillery and scattered in chaos. This was the signal for Captain Tudorov to order a general retreat of the flying detachment, which descended into a disorderly rout under the crushing pressure of the Serbian cavalry. Under the cover of a mere handful of horsemen, the Bulgarian artillery battery began its withdrawal, only to become hopelessly trapped in the thick, sticky mud among the steep hills. Right at that moment, the Serbian cavalry emerged on the ridge behind them. The cannons were faced total destruction. In this critical moment, Captain Kargiev performed the impossible. With superhuman effort, he managed to haul a single cannon to the very top of the hill and opened fire entirely on his own upon the advancing enemy. The first Bulgarian shell was so precise and shattering that the Serbian cavalry turned and fled in a wild panic. The guns were saved, but the panic in the rear was already uncontrollable. The exhausted soldiers of Lieutenant Mamarchev swept the supply trains into a chaotic flight towards the village of Izvor without waiting for orders. The Serbians triumphed on the battlefield. They had inflicted a total defeat upon the Bulgarians. Yet in their souls, they were already conquered. The stubborn defense of the handful of protectors on the 3rd and the extraordinary audacity of these peasant crowds on the 4th proved that the Serbians faced a brutal, grueling struggle with an entirely uncertain outcome.
An anonymous Serbian historian of the Timok army and a participant in the battle would record these prophetic words in his diary. Due to the events that unfolded on this day, November 4th, it is the most critical day for the Timok army. From this day forward begin all the erroneous actions of this army. This day erased the Timok army from the battle order of the active Serbian forces, as though the outcome had been catastrophic for it. At the same time, Captain Uzanov also realized the structural weakness of his forces. He wrote to headquarters, "The fictive support of the militia, given the relatively small number of regular troops and instructors, revealed itself in its full reality. Following the wounding of the 2 officers, the militia turned into mere mob, and because of this, the main reserve suffered a defeat." Furthermore, in the wake of the disaster at Kula, certain citizens within Vidin itself, instigated by the Russian consul and including members of the clergy, expressed the opinion that the city should be surrendered without a fight to avoid bloodshed. Others began burying their valuables, while some sought to flee to Romania. The hot-tempered Captain Uzanov, who forgave no one for lacking the fiery patriotism that consumed his own soul, poured out his fury in a telegram to the chief of the army staff, begging for the authority to execute by firing squad, apply corporal punishment, confiscate property, and exile traitors into the interior of Bulgaria. In response to this plea, the chief of the army staff commanded him to take the strictest measures and to punish any act of treason with death. The government confirmed this with the following telegram, signed by Prime Minister Karavelov. To Lam, the district governor, inform Captain Uzanov on behalf of the government that anyone who speaks or works towards the surrender of the Vidin fortress shall be court-martialed.
В 24 часа и осъждан на смърт наказан.
And so the north bleeds, but it holds. The Timok army is paralyzed by Bulgarian fury and loses its initiative. General Lesyanin's advance becomes extremely cautious, wasting precious days on reconnaissance, which delays the encirclement of Vidin by a whole week. This indecision grants Captain Uzanov the vital time needed to reinforce the Bulgarian garrison in Belogradchik. Under the command of Sub-Lieutenant Dvoryanov, he consolidates inside the fortress a reserve company, the Pleven and Sandrovo volunteer detachments, and the Belogradchik and Kutlovica militia companies, totaling 720 bayonets. Against them, the Serbians deploy 3 battalions of the 14th Regiment, totaling 1,500 rifles, 4 mountain guns, and 100 sabres. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Serbians launch an offensive in dense skirmish lines. As they begin to descend the slope overlooking the town, Lieutenant Dvoryanov unleashes 2 powerful rifle volleys upon them. At that exact moment, gunshots and deafening cries of "Ura" erupt almost directly from the Serbian rear, the work of the volunteers dispatched earlier into the woods. After a brief moment of hesitation, the Serbians turn their backs and flee the battlefield. The cry of "Ura" is instantly taken up by the entire Bulgarian skirmish line, and as one, the defenders surge forward in pursuit of the retreating enemy. The outcome of this victory is staggering. Approximately 90 Serbians are captured, alongside 200 rifles, several crates of ammunition and grenades, and 8 horses, including the mount of the Serbian regiment's commander. By the end of the day, the Serbian battalions have retreated entirely back across the border. Thus, within the first 5 days of the war, the northern detachment successfully fulfills its designated objectives. These dramatic events, encompassing the brilliant assault at Bregovo, the crushing defeat in the mud of Kula, and the unexpected triumph at Belogradchik, managed to buy a whole week for the preservation of the north. Yet while Vidin wins its desperate breath of life,
On the southern front, the clock is already counting down the final minutes before the absolute zenith of this bloody conflict. But before that can happen, the staff of the Western Corps in Sливnica and the General Staff in Sofia must urgently overhaul their battle plan, calculating every potential route of the Serbian Morava division following the Battle of Breznik. The chief of the army staff reports rumors that Captain Kisov has been routed and is retreating toward Dupnica, that all communications with Radomir have been severed, and that the exact location of the Serbians advancing from Breznik remains unknown. Artur von Hoon would later record in his diary, "The Serbians are advancing through Breznik toward Pernik. This implies not only a direct threat to the capital, but the ultimate danger for the army at Sливnica."
Sondern auch die größte Gefahr für die Armee bei Sливnica.
Did the Bulgarians fight like lions for 2 days at Sливnica, only to be surrounded now? This cannot be true. At the Midnight Council of War, the upcoming operations are fiercely debated. Since the Morava division directly threatens the left flank, it is decided that on the 7th, the defenders will limit themselves to passive operations. Meanwhile, a reconnaissance detachment will be dispatched against the Morava division toward Galabovci and Gurgulyat. However, since this maneuver requires the commitment of the Army Reserve, it is resolved that certain units from the right flank will withdraw into reserve, ready to reinforce the left flank should the need arise. The most critical task falls upon the reconnaissance detachment, led by the commander of the 1st Sofia Regiment, Captain Hristo Popov, who must verify the direction of the Morava division's advance. Placed under his command are 3 battalions and 4 cannons, charged with a singular monumental mission to halt any potential enemy advance toward the capital. Following the council with the Commander-in-Chief, the Corps Chief of Staff, Captain Paprikov, goes straight to the telegraph apparatus and enters into a dialogue with the Chief of the Army Staff, Captain Petrov. The 2 chiefs spend the night exchanging thoughts until dawn, issuing orders in accordance with the decisions made. Furthermore, Captain Petrov, Chief of the Army Staff, reports that he has commanded Captain Agura with a single militia battalion of 500 men and 4 cannons to occupy and defend the Vladaya Gorge. Another column, consisting of the 4th Peshtera Battalion and 2 cannons under the command of the battery commander Captain Zlatarski, will depart in the morning toward the village of Bankia, acting as a tactical link between Captain Popov's detachment and Captain Agura's forces. Serving as a reserve for both columns will be the battalions arriving in Sofia from southern Bulgaria on this very day, November 7th. At dawn, the telegraph line between Sofia and Sливnica is abruptly severed. Driven by the suffocating uncertainty surrounding the Morava division, the terrifying thought that enemy units have breached the Sofia highway grips everyone. From Sливnica, the prince dispatches his personal guard, a platoon from his convoy, to investigate the cause of the line failure, while the Chief of Staff dispatches Captain Botev, commander of the 4th Cavalry Regiment, from Sofia for the same purpose. Rittmeister Kirill Botev is the younger brother of the national hero Hristo Botev. His heroic path stretches from being a freedom fighter in Botev's rebel band and a political prisoner exiled in the fortress of St. Jean d'Acre, to eventually becoming a lieutenant general of the Bulgarian army. As it turns out, supply wagons had inadvertently knocked down a telegraph pole, causing the wire to touch the ground. The connection is swiftly restored. Shortly thereafter, the Commander-in-Chief, Prince Alexander, departs Sливnica for Sofia, his departure driven entirely by the urgent need to organize the capital's defense against the Morava division. Upon his departure, the prince sends a telegraphic order commanding that he be met at the Ministry of War at 10 a.m. by Chief of Staff Captain Petrov, the Minister of War, and the commander of the Eastern Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Nikolaev, who had been promoted in the meantime and had just arrived in Sofia. Bright, clear sunlight laughed down from the heavens when I stepped out of my house at around 7 a.m. on November 7th, the war correspondent Arthur von Hoon would later record in his memoirs. Elated by yesterday's joyful reports and inspired by the boldest hopes that today would bring us new, brilliant victories, I walked with a light heart towards the prince's konak. But all my bold hopes were instantly shattered the moment I saw the grief-stricken faces inside. The center of gravity, the prince said, lies along the Breznik-Sofia line. That is why I must go there. Sливница has held for 2 days and will be able to hold without me for a few days more. I am entirely confident in this, for I know the bravery of my soldiers and the capability of their commanders.
Днес или най-късно утре ще бъде всичко решено.
It is my firm conviction that a prince must be wherever the greatest danger threatens his people and his country. It was deeply difficult for him to exchange the role of a supreme field commander for that of a strategic organizer. I said to myself that wherever the prince is, that is where the ultimate decision must fall, and 5 minutes later my horse was saddled and I was on the road to Sofia. It grieved me to leave the heroes of Sливница. We had barely traveled half an hour down the road when suddenly we heard the heavy, booming roar of volleys echoing from the positions. And so, on the 7th of November, the battle that would decide the war begins. On this historic morning, the Bulgarians possessed 26 battalions, totaling 22,000 men, more than a quarter of whom are reservists, volunteers, militiamen, or the Romanian militia. To these are added 8 cavalry squadrons and 48 cannons. The Bulgarians have no other reserve forces that could be deployed on this day at Sливница. Against the defenders, the Serbians array 32 battalions, totaling 27,000 infantrymen, all first call regular troops, alongside 4 cavalry squadrons and 102 cannons. The true morale and fighting spirit of the Serbian troops at Sливница on November 7th is best demonstrated by a telegram sent from the chief of the operational department in Dragoman to the High Command, which had fled the previous day to Pirot, spearheaded by King Milan. The telegram read, among other things, "If the Bulgarians attack us today, I doubt we shall hold. Immediate and firm command is required here to execute without delay what the situation demands." The final order dispatched to the Serbian divisions by the chief of the operational department, Lieutenant Colonel Atanakovic, commands the Drina and Shumadia divisions to condense northward towards the Danube division, while the Morava division is to stand in reserve behind them. The Morava division, however, fails to execute the order, decisively halted by Captain Kisov's Radomir detachment. Near midnight, the commander of the Shumadia division, Colonel Banitsky, receives an order to relocate his division to the village of Dragotintsi, so that in the event of battle he would be closer to the Drina division in the center. When the division's chief of staff awakens Banitsky, reads him the order, and asks what dispositions should be made, the division commander replies, "Nothing, you should not have awakened me. You know that the high command is cowardly. In their minds, Bulgarians are popping up everywhere, and now the Danube and Drina men want us to save them. We cannot be everywhere and on all sides. We have done our job. Go to sleep."
Урадили smo svoj posao. Idi i spavaj.
Thus, even into the morning, the scattered battalions of the Shumadia division remain in their positions far to the south around the villages of Radulovci and Rakita, instead of reinforcing the center of the lines, a fatal blunder and a direct act of insubordination by the colonel. At the same time, Colonel Topalovic, commander of the Morava division, has still not received the order instructing him to move his division into reserve behind the other 2 Serbian divisions. He continues to operate under previous commands, which dictate that he attack the left flank and the rear of the Bulgarian position at Sливница. At 7 a.m., leaving 2 battalions in Breznik, he sets out for Sливница with 4 battalions, 1 cavalry squadron, and 20 cannons, in virtually the same formation as the previous day. An hour earlier, around 6 a.m., the commander of the 1st Sofia Infantry Regiment, Captain Hristo Popov, receives the directive from the Council of War to form the reconnaissance detachment. Incorporated into the detachment are 2 battalions from the 1st Sofia Regiment, the 4th Plovdiv Battalion, 4 cannons and 1 cavalry squadron, totaling roughly 2,500 bayonets. Captain Popov is assigned the following mission: to advance towards Rakovica in order to uncover the movement, strength and intentions of the enemy. If the enemy is advancing towards Sofia, Captain Popov is to attack them, and if they are concentrating on the Bulgarian left flank with their rear secured at Breznik, Popov is to screen and protect that flank. When the units assemble half an hour later, according to custom, the detachment commander summons all battalion, battery and company commanders, reads them the order of formation and salutes the soldiers, officially assuming command over them. By 10 a.m., the Bulgarian vanguard clashes with the Serbian cavalry near the village of Gurguljat. Captain Popov himself, ascending the heights north of the village, witnesses the entire Murava division deploying into battle formation with crushing artillery superiority. Against the 4 Bulgarian guns, the Serbians arrayed 20. As the Murava division is deploying, its commander, Colonel Topalovic, finally receives the letter ordering him to take his division into reserve. He immediately dispatches a message to the commander of the Shumadia division, asking whether he should obey this order and withdraw into reserve. Colonel Banitsky replies that he is coming to his aid with the utmost speed, which implies launching an attack, and that he will support him. And so a fierce battle erupts across the hills surrounding Gurguljat, with Popov and Topalovic actively maneuvering their companies across the heavily fractured terrain like pieces on a chessboard. As the artillery and infantry fire escalates to alarming proportions, the commander of the Sливnica left flank, Captain Savov, reinforces Captain Popov's detachment with everything he manages to scrape together. Accurately assessing the vulnerable weak spot of the Bulgarians, he dispatches artillery above all else, a total of 8 cannons with an immense supply of shells, aid that will prove decisive later in the day. As the day progresses, the Bulgarians succeed in halting the Serbian advance, and with the arrival of the 8 new guns, the Bulgarian artillery gains total supremacy over the Serbian batteries. Nevertheless, the situation remains intricate, and the Serbians attack continuously, launching relentless attempts to outflank the Bulgarian units. While the initial Serbian momentum is checked at Gurguljat, the decisive clash along the entire front of the Slivnica battlefield begins. On the right northern flank, this time the units do not withdraw. Instead, they spend the night in their occupied positions on the crest of Meka Srev, a mere 800 meters from the Serbian advance posts on the Triushi Heights. At dawn, a skirmish breaks out between the Bulgarian forward elements and the Serbian picket line. Soon, the artillery from both sides joins the fray, and it becomes clear that the Bulgarian position on Meka Srev is profoundly disadvantageous. The height is a flat plateau, seemingly designed to be caught in a crossfire from the 2 eastern peaks of Triushi, which tower directly over it. The commander of the right sector, Benderev, appoints the commander of the Vidin regiment and hero of the battles over the last 2 days, Captain Marinov, as the chief of the Meka Srev position. This 29-year-old Bulgarian officer, appointed years prior as the prince's aide-de-camp, has already become the ultimate model of military virtue. His subordinates adore him, trust him blindly, and are ready to follow him into the jaws of hell. The moment he sees his friend, Captain Toshev, Marinov greets him and adds prophetically,
Ще мрем днес тук. Бъди готов за атака.
On this sunny morning, standing behind Captain Marinov are 27 companies, roughly 4,000 bayonets, and 8 cannons. Facing him is the commander of the Serbian Danube division, Colonel Horstig, whose arrogance has completely melted away over the last 2 days. Even though he disposes of 7 battalions, or nearly 7,000 men on the Triushi Heights, he desperately demands reinforcement from the Drina division to the south and the cavalry brigade north of the ridges. From the sudden, thunderous roar of artillery, the colonel realizes that the Bulgarians have launched a massive, full-scale offensive. And indeed, toward noon, the Bulgarians hurl themselves into the assault. Everyone, from Captain Marinov down to the very last private, is convinced that remaining grouped and fully exposed to enemy bullets on the crest of Meka Srev is impossible. They must either move forward or fall back, and the Bulgarians surge forward uncontrollably. Leaving 10 companies in reserve, 17 companies advance under a brutal crossfire, attacking in 2 waves spaced 15 minutes apart, gradually enveloping the slopes of the 2 eastern ridges from 3 sides. This relentless forward movement of the Bulgarian battalions forces Colonel Horstig to commit his very last reserve battalions to reinforce the flanks of Triushi, causing the Serbian fire to intensify even further. In this mad charge against an adversary nearly double their strength, the commander of the 2nd Company of the 2nd Plovdiv Battalion, Sub-Lieutenant Nikola Enev, is fatally shot, and shortly after, Sub-Lieutenant Ivan Bobev, commander of the 11th Company of the 5th Danube Infantry Regiment, falls pierced by Serbian bullets. In the very center of the fray, his eyes fiercely locked onto the firing enemy, Captain Marinov drives his lions onward and upward. Exactly at this fatal moment, one of the thousands of whistling bullets strikes the young captain in the chest, and he falls, critically wounded. A wave of hesitation ripples through the advancing Bulgarian ranks. The rumor spreads amidst the smoke and explosions. He is down. The night of war, our fearless Marinov has fallen, critically wounded. In this grim moment, the commander of the Drina division unleashes the 4th Infantry Regiment and 16 artillery pieces into the flank of the Bulgarians advancing toward the Triushi Heights, and the situation for the Bulgarian right sector becomes critical. The situation is equally critical in Sofia during this early afternoon of November 7th. The muffled and ominous thuds of artillery fire echo from Sливница, and the capital is buzzing with rumors of approaching Serbian troops. Arthur von Hohn, who had arrived earlier alongside the prince, is stunned by the tense picture and writes, "One man told me that the Serbians are approaching Sofia from all sides. Another added that they are only 17 kilometers away from the city and will enter the capital tonight before dusk. A third told me that Dedo Tsenkov and his associates are agitating among the terrified populace to drive out the prince, who is to blame for everything, and that exiling the prince is not only the wish of our liberator, Russia, but the desire of all the other great powers as well." The city streets were packed with people, the shops shuttered. In a word, everything looked as though the entry of the Serbians into the capital was expected from minute to minute. Meanwhile, diplomatic representatives of the great powers assemble at the Union Club, drafting and delivering an official note to the government. In it, they advise the prince, in the interest of the population, to surrender Sofia without a fight, so as not to give the Serbians a pretext to resort to extreme measures and sack the capital. The Russian Minister Plenipotentiary Alexander Koyander is also highly active, anticipating an inevitable Bulgarian defeat and the entry of the Serbians into Sofia. It is at his urgent insistence that Metropolitan Clement and Dragan Tsankov convene a meeting of their followers at the metropolis to plead with the Russian Emperor for salvation. Everywhere one could see only inconsolable faces and utter despair, von Hoon would later recall. Only one small young lady stood as an exception to everyone present, and that was Mrs. Katinka Karavelova, the gracious wife of the Prime Minister. She alone remained unshakable and refused to believe the false rumors being spread throughout the city by certain individuals. She told me, "Do not be afraid, sir."
Аз ви уверявам, че е невъзможно сърбите да победят българските юнаци.
And since it is impossible, it simply will not happen. Rest easy and do not listen to these foolish rumors. You will see for yourself in a few hours that I am speaking the truth. I listened to the words of Mrs. Katinka Karavelova with great astonishment, but to my shame, I must admit that I too was infected by the panic and refused to believe her words. It was rightly said afterward that on November 7th, Mrs. Katinka Karavelova was the only true man among the capital's population. And so, on the 7th of November 1885, in this bright autumn afternoon, the sublime moment of the Serbo-Bulgarian War arrives. While the State Treasury and National Archives travel toward Pleven, and the Prince awaits reinforcements from Ichtiman to march through Vladaya towards Breznik, the young Captain Popov heroically holds off the Serbians near Gurgulja. At the exact same time, showered in lead, thousands of Bulgarian soldiers fearlessly storm the Tri Ushi heights, while the officers in Gujev's palace frantically search for a way to thwart the fatal assault of the Drina division into the rear of the advancing Bulgarians. And up on the ridge, amidst the thunder of battle, the bleeding Captain Marinov casts a fading gaze toward the blue sky. His lips continue to faintly murmur, "Forward." As a solitary thought flashes through the agony of pain, the next 2 hours will decide the war.